Good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning, San Bernardino, Riverside, the Inland Empire, Rancho Cucamonga. I love saying Rancho Cucamonga, and Loma Linda, California. And good afternoon and good evening to those listening to us on the live stream link. This is the Kathleen Wells Show, and I'm Kathleen. And, you know, normally what do? I do my political spiel, the first part of the hour, so that you guys and my listeners know what's going on. But I'm going to do something a little different this time. I'm going to bring on my guest immediately because this is an important issue. It's an important issue. It's a historic issue for the Middle East, for Palestine. And my guest today is Richard Falk. He is the UN Rapporteur. And we are going to discuss Palestine's bid for statehood. But before I bring on my guests, I'd like to give out the call-in number so listeners can call in with comments or questions. And the call-in number is 1-888-909-1050. And, you know, I encourage folks to call in because I love a dynamic show. I like it to be interactive, and I like to know what my listeners are thinking about this issue. So, as I said, I'm delighted to have today as my guest Professor Emeritus of International Law at Princeton University, Richard Falk. Richard has also been appointed to 2 United Nations positions on the Palestinian territories. In 2008, Richard was appointed by the United Nations Human Rights Council to a 6-year term as the United Nations Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territories, which have been occupied by Israel since 1967. So as I said, I'm going to go straight to my guest, which is uncharacteristic. So thank you, Richard, for joining me this morning, this day.
Oh, I'm glad to be with you, Kathleen.
Well, I'm sorry, what did you say?
I said it was my pleasure to be with you.
Oh, well, I'm absolutely delighted to have you. I think it's fantastic, and we are going to discuss something that is quite historic for Palestine, the Middle East, and for the U.S. So last Friday, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas handed over a historic request to UN Chief Ban Ki-moon asking the United Nations to admit the state of Palestine as a full member. So essentially, Palestinians are turning to the Security Council for admission to the UN. And it's anticipated that the U.S. will veto this request. Tell me procedurally and substantively, what does this mean? What should observers think?
Well, I think there's a basic distinction that's important to understand, and that is there are 2 issues bound up in this Palestinian initiative. The first is to become a member of the UN and to participate fully as a state in General Assembly and Security Council activities. And that requires a recommendation by the Security Council to the General Assembly and the approval of both those bodies in order to become a member. The other part of the Palestinian initiative is to be recognized as a state by the General Assembly, which requires only a majority vote, conceivably a 2/3 vote, and is virtually assured of passage because there is no U.S. veto. And that gives the Palestinians the status of what's called enhanced non-member observer status, and that allows them to take part but not to vote, not to speak, not to introduce initiatives. But as a state, they can gain access to other international institutions, most significantly to the International Criminal Court. And it's that possibility that some people feel is behind such an intense Israeli effort to prevent this from happening.
Oh, you're saying the International Criminal Court is behind the foreclosing Palestine having the opportunity to be considered a state?
Well, I think it represents part of the hostility that doesn't seem quite rational that Israel is devoting to this Palestinian initiative, because all they are actually doing is asking for a symbolic acknowledgement of a diplomatic status that has already been achieved. More than 100 governments have diplomatic relations with Palestine on the basis that they do constitute a state, a people, a governing process within more or less recognized international borders. So what is at stake here is the participation in the UN system, either as a member or as a state recognized by the UN.
Mm-hmm. And substantively, what significance, relevance, what difference will it make?
Well, it probably doesn't make any difference in the resolution of the conflict, except for the political difference that it could lead to this kind of Israeli backlash, which would put great pressure on the Palestinian Authority as the governing entity in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. It doesn't have any bearings on a negotiated agreement, which the Palestinians continue to say is their objective, as well as the supposed objective of Israel. So it's really a symbolic move, and thwarting this symbolic move has important consequences also, because it makes the international community more aware of the degree to which the U.S. cannot claim to be a neutral balancing actor, but is really a isolated partisan that is preventing world public opinion from being expressed in relation to this issue, and is keeping the Palestinian people under occupation for an intolerably long period of time. It's already over 44 years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you have submitted reports to the International Criminal Court to investigate Israeli leaders. You have written that they were responsible for violations of international criminal law. What have been the responses that you have gotten to those reports?
Well, these reports are actually not submitted to the International Criminal Court, but to the General Assembly and the Human Rights Council in Geneva, and they do contain recommendations that accountability mechanisms be empowered to investigate whether Israeli political and military leaders should be prosecuted for war crimes, particularly in connection with the blockade of Gaza and the attacks on Gaza that occurred back at the end of 2008.
So you're saying, and I'm asking, what has been like the response that you have gotten? How effective have your reports been?
Well, I think they are broadly accepted by most of the members of the UN, but they lack the political will to confront U.S. support of Israel. And so this geopolitical obstacle has prevented those recommendations from being tested by some kind of judicial procedure.
Mm-hmm. So, and you said that this proposal, or this requirement or request rather, that Abbas has submitted to the General Assembly will be symbolically important. Critics say that this request by Abbas will keep Palestine beholden to the Oslo process. that created it and has turned it into the enforcement arm of Israel's occupation. So when you speak about confronting our policies, United States foreign policies and Israel policies, they haven't been confronted in your reports. And will there be a confrontation now that Abbas has submitted this request, do you think?
I think it's hard to say. There is tension within the wider Palestinian community, particularly between the people living directly under occupation in the West Bank and East Jerusalem and the people living under Hamas's rule in Gaza, and those outside the territory in refugee camps and in exile, having been displaced. Mm-hmm. So you have several different Palestinian constituencies, and there is this concern in the Palestinian community that Abbas's initiative has the effect of confining the dispute to one of territory. Mm-hmm. And this endangers, or is seen to possibly endanger, the prospects of Palestinian refugees to secure their rights under international law.
Mm-hmm. And where do you come down on that?
Well, I think it's a hard issue to fully grasp because it depends on the degree of confidence that one has in the Palestinian Authority. They did, Mahmoud Abbas, in his speech to the General Assembly last week, did try to give reassurances that this initiative would not jeopardize the role of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the parent organization, PLO, mm-hmm. that has representation for these separate Palestinian communities, including the refugees and those living in exile. Mm-hmm. But there are among Palestinians those that are not convinced that this is a reliable enough reassurance. I'm not really in a position to make this judgment. It's so much contained within Palestinian politics. And of course, the right of self-determination is a Palestinian right and should be exercised by the Palestinian people, and I respect that primacy of their own pursuit of their rights.
Mm-hmm. Well, are you familiar with Professor of Law Francis Boyle?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, well, I read something that he had written, and he was sort of asserting that this move by Abbas was legitimate and credible and the right way to go. That was the position he was taking.
Yes, I am familiar also with that view, and I take a slightly different view in the sense that I certainly think that from the UN perspective, Palestine should be treated as a state entitled to membership. We should remember that at the beginning of Abbas's speech, he congratulated South Sudan for becoming the 193rd member of the UN, mm-hmm. and that decision was reached after just 3 days between the time it submitted its application for membership. Mm-hmm. And so from that UN perspective, but as I say, I think the overall assessment of the initiative is not for others to make. It really is a Palestinian issue, and it's a contested one. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think the speech to the General Assembly that was given by Mahmoud Abbas was a historic occasion that will long be valued and remembered because it used appropriately strong language to describe the Palestinian ordeal of living under occupation, of enduring what he called the annexation wall, the ethnic cleansing of East Jerusalem. he used language that is stronger than what the Palestinian Authority has generally used in describing their relationship to Israel and the conflict. And it's the first time the Palestinian Authority has really defied the leadership and guidance of the United States.
Because I remember that some time ago, a few months back, that there was a document leaked that showed complicity or disappointment with Abbas's position. So at this point, with what he's done, you feel he's been firm and he's been clear and explicit?
Yes, I think that the credibility of the Palestinian Authority as representing the Palestinian people was very much at issue, and this initiative, certainly in part, was an effort to restore that credibility or to establish that credibility. And whether it's been successful in doing that or not is hard to say at this point. It has brought renewed attention to the conflict and to the ordeal of the Palestinian people, and I think in that sense it has to be viewed as a positive development.
Okay, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to discuss Netanyahu's speech, which was delivered right after Mahmoud Abbas, and also we'll discuss the U.S. role in all of this. What impact, what are the ramifications of the U.S. vetoing this request by Abbas, and also I'm going to give out the call-in number because we'll take your phone calls. So the number is 1-888, this is a toll-free number, 1-888-909-1050. Stick with me, we'll be right back. Welcome back. This is the Kathleen Wells Show, and my guest today is UN Rapporteur Richard Falk. I'm delighted to have him, and we were just talking about the fact that Palestine has submitted a request for statehood last Friday. Professor Falk, let me ask you, what do you think? Critics say that Netanyahu, in his speech, which was delivered after Mahmoud Abbas, that he extended his hand in peace to the Palestinians. What is your response to that?
I didn't hear it that way. I heard it rather as a rhetorical and polemical address in which he criticized the UN for its anti-Israeli postures, where he didn't offer any assurance whatsoever that settlement expansion wouldn't continue during a negotiating process, in which he seemed to imply that Israel would have to maintain a military presence in large portions of the West Bank for its security purposes. There was nothing in that speech, if you were a Palestinian, that would make you feel that there was a genuine commitment to achieving a sustainable peace. And this is reinforced by Netanyahu's overall view, repudiating the Oslo process at the outset, being ambivalent at best about the establishment of a Palestinian state. So one really, I think, fairly can only view that speech as a rhetorical assertion of direct negotiations as a further delay in solving the conflict. And you have to remember that delay is not neutral. It has the settlements and the settlers, the separation wall, the settler roads only, all these developments, including just the ordeal of living under occupation, have been at the expense of Palestinian rights and prospects. And so to invite the Palestinians to engage in one more cycle of futile negotiations is not an offer of peace or any kind of reasonable prospect that peace would be forthcoming.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, I was just going to ask you about the bilateral negotiations that have been taking place for the last 20 years, 2 decades, and if they have bore any fruit. But I see we have a caller now from David Evans from Vancouver, Washington, and he has a question along those same lines. So welcome, David.
Thank you, Kathleen. What a pleasure it is to talk to both of you. It needs to be made, and Professor Falk just alluded to this, it needs to be made perfectly clear to our listening audience what has been happening here over the last 2 decades with these so-called peace talks. They have been used as nothing but a stalling tactic by Israel, as Israel has continued to gobble up more and more of the Palestinian land. And that's what the plan is now, is for Israel, with Obama's consent, to get back to the peace table and drag on talks, kick the can down the road as Israel continues to steal ever more land. Immediately after Abbas, the Palestinian leadership, placed his proposition before the UN, Israel announced that it was going to install 1,100 new housing units in East Jerusalem, which was to have been, under international law, the capital of a new Palestinian state. East Jerusalem has already been bulldozers are working there today as I speak, destroying Palestinian land and expanding parks on Palestinian cemeteries on what was supposed to have been their capital in East Jerusalem. And Israel also announced that they are going to remove 30,000 Bedouin people from Palestinian land in their home in other places in the West Bank. So anyway, will you address that further and make it perfectly clear what's happening here and what Israel is up to?
Well, I mean, you made a statement. Can you put it in the form of a question to Professor Falk?
I can. I'm sorry. Abbas had no choice, is my point. He had to unilaterally make this attempt at statehood at the UN because 2 states were going nowhere. They were losing their land. Do you see any future for Israel? Because in my mind, and in many scholars' minds that follow this more closely than I do, Israel is committing suicide by not allowing a Palestinian state. That it will, one day, be a demographically altered state all the way from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean. Only it will be declared an apartheid state if the minority Jewish people in Israel try to run that whole operation. That's not very well said. But,
okay, I'll rephrase it for you. So, Professor
you.
Falk, the question is will it be disadvantageous for Israel to oppose this move by Abbas?
Thank you.
I think it would be probably disadvantageous for the Netanyahu leadership because it's under attack and pressure from the even more extreme Lieberman rival leadership. And so in that sense, I think Israel is pursuing, in a sense, not the interests of the country, but the interests of those that are in political power in the country at the present time. And that's one of the deeper problems, that I think Israel has now a leadership and a political process that is incapable of serving their own national interests. And therefore, its behavior, not only in this instance, but in its relationship to Turkey recently, in its attitude toward its Arab neighbors, is imperiling its security by being so defiant and so resistant to international law and international public opinion.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've written, Professor Falk, in Slouching Toward a Palestinian Holocaust, you compared it to the Nazi record of collective punishment. Do you still stand by that characterization?
Well, I think I wrote that before I had this UN position, and I think given my responsibilities within the UN framework, I wouldn't use that comparison at this point. I would say that the continued collective punishment of all of the people living under occupation, but especially those that are subject to being essentially locked into Gaza and blockaded, does represent a flagrant violation of the Geneva Conventions prohibiting collective punishment. And it does reflect an Israeli mentality that doesn't distinguish between the people, the Palestinian people, and those that it claims are unlawfully resisting its occupation.
So essentially 2 decades, 20 years of bilateral negotiations hasn't bore any fruit, has it?
No, and my argument is it's worse than bore no fruit. It's put the Palestinians in a much less favorable position in relation to establishing a state of their own than they were in 1967. It's not static. In other words, delay hurts the Palestinians and, in one sense, helps the Israelis. Also, one of the important elements in the background is the diversion of water from Palestinian aquifers for use in Israel. And it has, this diversion over this 20-year period has substantially diminished Palestinian water resources, which, as you know, are absolutely critical in that part of the world for a viable human existence.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So talk to me about the notion that Netanyahu is placing a condition that Palestinians recognize Israel as a Jewish state.
Well, that, too, I think, is the kind of condition that just is impossible for the Palestinian people to accept. And Abbas again made clear that you're dealing with 1.6 million Palestinians living as a discriminated minority in Israel, in pre-67 Israel. And for them to have to subscribe to the reality of a Jewish state is somehow a contradiction of their own human rights as equal citizens who are non-Jewish. So that the whole idea of ethnic or religious states in the 21st century is unacceptable from the perspective of human rights and democracy, where the state has to be above religion and ethnicity in order to serve all the people within its territory and to respect their human dignity. Mm-hmm. And although Israel can remain perfectly reasonably a Jewish homeland, it can't or it shouldn't be allowed to identify the state as having this ethnic and potentially religious identity.
Mm-hmm. And is this accurate to say that if Israel is considered a Jewish state, it would be a theocracy? Is that accurate?
It would. Well, I think there's a difference between an ethnic claim and a religious claim. And as far as I know, there isn't the same sense as exists in Iran, for instance, of religious leaders providing the ultimate source of political authority in the state. So at this stage, it's essentially an ethnic claim, but it's reinforced by a more and more influential Jewish religious establishment, both in the military and in the governing process. And so from the perspective of the Palestinian minority living in Israel, it is a threatening set of trends, and to legitimize those trends by calling Israel a Jewish state would, it seems to me, be quite unfortunate at this stage.
Mm-hmm. I mean, what countries recognize another country as a? In other words, the United States is not recognized as a Christian state. I just, I don't.
Yeah, it's as I say, it's just in a multi-ethnic, multi-religious set of political communities, which is the characteristic of every major state. It's just unacceptable to reduce the identity of any state to a single ethnicity or a single religion.
Uh-huh. Okay, we've got a call now from Elizabeth. Elizabeth from Virginia. Hi, Elizabeth. You have a question for?
Yeah, thank you for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
Professor Falk, I admire you enormously, and I'm really grateful for what I consider your contributions, your efforts towards peace and justice. And, of course, without justice, there's not going to be any peace. I have...
Oh, I can barely hear you. Could you speak up?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, could you speak up just a little louder?
Forgive me.
Yes, I can't hear at all.
I was just saying how very much I admire Professor Falk.
Oh, wait, hold on. He can't hear at all. You can't hear at all, Professor Falk?
No, I can't hear Elizabeth at all. I just heard her name when you said it.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Well, you know what? I will repeat the question.
Okay,
or
good.
Can you... Yeah, I'll repeat the question, Elizabeth. I'm sorry. He can't hear you at all.
Okay. Should I try louder?
Yeah, louder would be good.
Okay. Professor Falk, I want to say how very much I admire you and that I am grateful for your efforts on behalf of really human rights, which is your job.
I don't know.
And without any justice, of course, there can be no peace. My concerns are what happens eventually when, and I think there will be one day, recognition of the Palestinian state and the necessity of removing those illegal Jewish colonists in the West Bank. It seems to me it would be almost a civil war in Israel, but it's one which the leadership brought about intentionally.
Okay.
Okay,
let me just repeat your question because he can't hear it. I think we're having some technical difficulties here. So I'll repeat your first question and I'll let you ask the second question, Elizabeth. Okay, Professor Falk, you ready for the question? Hello?
Hello?
Oh, you ready for the question?
Of course.
I'm going to rephrase it and repeat it because you can't hear her. And her question first, she wanted to extend her admiration and gratitude for your efforts, humanitarian efforts. And her question is, Betty's question is, what will happen when the illegal settlements are taken down? She thinks am I phrasing this right, Betty? Can you sort of repeat it again? I'm sorry.
Well, what will happen when a Palestinian state is recognized and the international community states that these settlers are there illegally?
Oh, okay, Professor Falk. She wants to know what will happen when the settlements are characterized as illegal and the international community recognizes the illegality of these settlements. What will be the result of that?
Well, first I thank her for her gracious comments about my role, but these settlements have already been widely understood to be illegal, that they're violations of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which prohibits an occupying power from transferring its own population to an occupied society and establishing any kind of presence there. So that it's a question of how do you implement this law that has been violated so persistently, and whether there exists the political will and capability to reverse the process. In other words, to dismantle these unlawful settlements and return the control of the territory to the Palestinian people. What's widely been assumed to be the likely outcome of a successful peace negotiation would be that the main settlement blocks would remain in Israeli hands, would be incorporated into Israel, and Palestine would be given some equivalent amount of land. Whether that equivalent amount of land would really compensate for the loss of the very good land that the settlements have been built upon is highly questionable.
Mm-hmm.
But the formula for peace has recently been, as was expressed in Obama's May 2011 speech, a Palestinian state within 1967 borders modified by land swaps to overcome the loss of Palestinian territory due to Israel being allowed to incorporate these main settlement blocks into its territory.
Mm-hmm. You bring up Obama. He also delivered a speech on that day. Give us your thoughts on that speech he delivered.
Well, I think from a Palestinian perspective, it was very disappointing. One has to remember that a year ago he more or less promised that the Palestinians would have a state within a year. And this time he said peace was difficult. He never alluded to the continued expansion of unlawful Israeli settlements that had been, you remember, back in 2009 at Cairo. The litmus test of Israeli good faith was their willingness to freeze settlement expansion. And having backed away from that commitment and not reacting at all to other forms of unlawful Israeli behavior, it reflected this unconditional commitment to what Israel wants, whether it's good from the perspective of U.S. interests or not. And it, I'm afraid, shows the degree to which Obama's policy on the conflict is a reflection of his domestic relations and the sense that if you depart even slightly from Israeli preferences, you will be punished domestically in terms of Democratic Party support, in terms of funding, and eventually in terms of electoral outcomes.
This is unfortunate. We're going to try a call one more time. Let's see if we can be a little more successful with this call, right? From Rafiq. We have a call from Rafiq in Maryland.
Yes, Dr. Falk, my question is, having to deal with revisionist Zionists like Avigdor and Benjamin, is there hope for peace or peaceful coexistence when Lieberman is calling for the ethnic cleansing of my own family in Haifa City? What do you think?
Did you get that, Professor Falk?
No, I couldn't hear it at all.
Oh, you couldn't hear it at all? I'm so disappointed. Can you repeat it, and I'll repeat it for him? I'm sorry. Could you? Yeah.
Dr. Falk, having to deal with leader revisionist Zionists like Avigdor and Benjamin, is there hope for peace or coexistence when Lieberman is calling for the ethnic cleansing of my own family in Haifa City?
Okay, Rafiq would like to ask, given that there has been revisionist history by like Avigdor, and the fact that Lieberman is asking for ethnic cleansing for his family, is there a hope for peace? I hope I'm rephrasing that properly.
Well, in the way that question is formulated, I think that is to say...
Rafiq said he wants to let you know that his family lives in Haifa.
I can't... I don't have the political imagination to see how peace can proceed from the premises that are being held by Lieberman and by the Netanyahu coalition government. Just seems to me that it doesn't lead to a peaceful resolution of the conflict. It doesn't lead to secure human rights for the Palestinian minority living in Israel, including Haifa, and it looks toward a greater and greater imposition of Israeli governance over the West Bank and East Jerusalem in a manner that, to my mind, makes a two-state solution practically impossible, no matter what the intentions of the parties.
So you're not optimistic?
I'm not optimistic with this Israeli leadership. I think there has been a growing international solidarity movement supportive of the Palestinian struggle. I think there is a realization, even in Washington and in the United States generally, that Israel is behaving in an irresponsible and unreasonable way that is damaging to regional security in the Middle East and to the longer-term American interests in the region, as well as perpetuating a situation of injustice as far as the Palestinian people are concerned.
Mm-hmm. So if you had your druthers, what would you like to see happen? What would be the best-case scenario?
For a peaceful outcome, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that what makes it impossible to envision is that the current leadership in Tel Aviv is just determined to hold on to a set of intrusions onto the Palestinian territory. So, as I say, I can't see how you can establish an independent Palestinian state, so that the only real solution that seems to flow from present conditions would be a total transformation of the Israeli governing process of the sort that occurred in South Africa in response to the anti-apartheid campaign, and a recognition that, given all these facts on the ground, that the only kind of relationship that will work is a binational, secular, democratic state in which both peoples enjoy sovereignty and a unified government of some sort.
Mm-hmm. So that raises two issues. That raises the one issue of the BDS movement. And
yes.
Exactly. And then it also, I just lost it. I had a thought there and I lost it. So what are your thoughts about the BDS movement?
Well, I think that's an important part of the soft power tactics that are increasingly expressive of a nonviolent Palestinian resistance movement.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a very important development that people should recognize that, by and large, the Palestinian resistance to Israeli occupation and to denial of Palestinian inalienable rights is taking the form of what I call a legitimacy war, where the Palestinians are successfully trying to take control over the moral and legal heights of the conflict as a way of pressing their claims against occupation, exile, refugee status.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and now I remember the other issue is that you said that the Netanyahu government had to sort of shoulder most of the responsibility. However, the Israeli citizenry voted for that government, correct? So they have to...
Yes, there's no question that the Netanyahu government is an expression of political democracy in Israel, and as a result, the Israeli people, to an extent, are themselves an obstacle to a peaceful resolution of the conflict. That was true in South Africa as well, and shouldn't be taken as conclusive. People can be quite easily shifted in their perspective toward a conflict of this sort. And my view is that a determined leadership by Obama could shift the American approach to Israel to a much more balanced view that would be quite acceptable to the majority of the American people, and that it's the Beltway that is so unconditionally and rigidly entrenched in this pro-Israeli posture.
Well, I want to thank you, Professor Falk, for coming on my show today. I definitely want to reserve the right to ask you on again. I enjoyed this conversation, this discussion very thoroughly, and I appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thank you, Kathleen. It was a good discussion from my point of view, and I'll be glad to do it again.
Oh, perfect. Okay, listeners, you've been listening to the Kathleen Wells Show, and my guest this morning, this afternoon in some areas, was Professor Falk. I thought it was a fantastic conversation. I apologize for the technical difficulties, but we'll get that fixed, right? So take care, everyone out there, and this is the Kathleen Wells Show. Thanks again. Bye.